Okay, we are moving on to the next panel discussion. I know some of us here are hungry, but let's be hungry for the new Africa. So right after this panel discussion, the food will be ready for us to have lunch before we continue. So kind apologies. We are now going to look at the African affairs, relations, and policies. And to have on here, I would invite the presence of Dr. Henry Kwabena Kokefu. He is the Executive Director for the Environmental Protection Agency, Ghana. Honorable, please welcome on stage. Please let's put our hands together for him as he comes on stage. Next is Dr. Stella Ejenim Boateng. She is the former deputy executive CEO for the VRA, which is Volta River Authority. She is a consultant, a human resource and leadership development expert. Thank you, ma'am, for being on here. Next is Ambassador Elijah Onyagba, doctor as they call him. He is a Nigerian ambassador to the Republic of Burundi. Let's welcome on stage Ambassador Elijah. All right, these are going to be the people for today's African Affairs, Relations, and Policies. Okay. All right, if we can all be seated so we can go right into the African Affairs, Relations, and Policies. Okay, thank you so much for being here today. We're just going to dive right into what is really the African affairs about, what is policies, what are the relations we are looking at. And we've all had previous panelists over here who have spoken about the rebuilding and the rebranding of the African way. Now, if we look at our African affairs, our relations, which embodies the countries within the continent, we look at some policies that we brought up in terms of the African continental trade and all the others that is looking to the new Africa. When we look at this amidst the ever-changing global landscape and Africa's unique position, how do you think we can strategically redefine Africa's narrative, harnessing its strengths and addressing its challenges to foster inclusive growth, sustainable development, and equitable partnership? In summary, we are looking to encourage each panelist to reflect on the current perception of Africa, explore innovative ways to leverage Africa's strengths, and address the challenges hindering its progress. So I'm going to start with Honorable Kwabena. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleague panelists. Yes, I will begin by saying that you are welcome to Ghana. The President of the Republic, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, is very much aware of some of these programs that seek to bring Africa together in the quest of developing the continent. Where I'm coming from, my sector minister, Dr. Kokou Afriyie, is also very much particular about these things because we're looking forward to see how best we can leverage on environmental protection and safeguarding within the African continent to contribute to the nation buildings and total African development as a whole. On your question, since it borders on policy, it then flows into governance systems and how governments within Africa are trying to get things done in order to foster development. Our first panel discussion primarily had to do with the private sector participation and all that. So our attempt to marry both the public sector governance systems through policies and all other things, how it does impact on private sector participation in the sphere of African development. And I'm also happy that the SDGs, that the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals that have been put forward by the United Nations, serves as the guidelines or principles for which we can leverage on. Now, the policy frameworks have had human development at the center, at the core. But then the narrative on Africa has been one of negativities, if I may say. And that brings to fore the challenges that are fighting against or hampering African development. So you cannot leave out conflict situations on the African continent. You cannot leave out poor governance systems. You cannot leave out human rights abuse, and also you cannot leave out inequality in resource allocations and all those things that goes on. Africa is endowed with natural resources, and I was happy to hear from the first panelist grouping placing the human resource capital as the most important, which I very much do agree. But then the natural resource, being it renewable or non-renewable, has contributed to the being of African today, which, in other words, should have been the other way around. Come to think of it, that countries or nations across the globe that are endowed with natural resources are the most poor and are most vulnerable and are the most unstable economically and politically. So what has been the situation, what has been the case? Here we have the tragedy of the commons on our hands. We have greediness, we have all kinds of devices through governance systems and all that. So it places leadership in Africa in a poor state. So if we are to rebrand, if we are to get to the new levels that we want to do, it means we have got to identify all these negative trends, the challenges, and then find a way of addressing them. The important thing is that Africa on its own naturally has taken steps to do that. Africa is the only continent on the earth globally that has the largest youthful population. And youthful population means the quest for development, the quest to do more. And if that is the case, then we don't have problem with human capital, so to speak. But then how do we get this into the developmental mainstreaming agenda? And that is another governance systems, providing jobs, creating wealth through the natural resource exploitation and development that we do have. So the conversation must change. We have no option, Africa. We cannot be left behind at this point in time. Haven't gotten all that needs to move forward. So for me, one, it has to do with looking at governance systems, leadership taking up the major role of providing accountability, making sure human rights are respected, making sure the rule of law plays its role, and then also getting the people to come to attitudinal change. How do we change our attitudes? How do we come to terms with the realities of the day, so we cannot be left behind? There was something that came across again during the first discussions. Indigenous knowledge. What has happened? Because we are being told that civilization began in Africa, and it's a fact. So what happened? That we deviated from that point. And the lead speaker pointed it out. Language, education, systems of education, and all that has contributed to our backwardness. So if we are to go forward, if we are to renew, rebrand, then we must necessarily go back to our roots and learn those values that forebears lived with, and then made them the Africans, the proud Africans that they used to be. So it may not necessarily be looking at the niceties, building the big houses, having the cars, and all those things that may make us great and strong again. But the values that we have, the moral values, the family units, the communal spirit that we have, the love for one another, being our brother's keeper, and then also contributing and then coming together as a people. We will get to, I saw the other question, integration or integrating African strengths, our advantages, comparative advantages. In most cases, we have some of these conferences going on, our leaders who meet, and at that level, the integration works. The champagne and the whiskeys will go along. But are we carrying our people along? That is where the problem is, particularly the entrepreneurs, the ordinary citizens. How are we integrating them, African, our trade, and all those things? So policies like AFTA, agreements like AFTA, policies that will foster inter-African trade is quite welcoming, and we need to take advantage of all that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we move on to Dr. Stella, there's something interesting you highlighted in terms of attitudes, especially as Africans. I recently went for one of these trade programs where stakeholders from African countries came there. And as a youth, as I sat at the corner, I was just appalled. One article could not be agreed by all the countries there for us to progress. It's taking them 3 months of coming from their country to another country just to agree on one word in the article. So if these are the things that is happening, even when we go for meetings, like he was saying, how many of us within the rooms actually listen to what panelists say? Most of the times we sit here, and that's the honest truth. We are just waiting for our turn to be called here to say, okay, this is what we are doing. How do we work collaboratively to make the change? And these are issues that I believe progressively, let's all come together in one accord, because if I'm listening to him speak, it might not be my field, but I might listen to something that will benefit a youth out there who is actually needing it. We mostly find entrepreneurship classes where we're doing investors class. And one time when we created something like that, someone wanted to do share butter, but none of the investors ever invested. Not because the program or the project was not good, but the investor had something he was looking for. So at the end of the day, there was another person who also sat in the investor system who also knew somebody who was interested in share butter. So as we sit here, just a way to digress, let's really focus on what our panelists are saying, because it might not be of importance to you, but it might be important to your sister. You might need somebody in the EPA in Ghana to help your sister to do whatever environmental thing she wants to do. This is the man here who will do it. You might need someone to give you an idea of the future of remittances. PK is there to do it. But if you're not listening to the right things, how do we actually inform changes? And so please, for us that are digressing a bit during the panel discussion, please let's focus. Because sometimes if you're sitting up here and you are speaking and someone is speaking, it's quite uncomfortable. Because you feel, am I not saying the right things? So please let's focus. That's just by the way. Okay, moving on, Dr. Stella.
Hello. Yeah, so thank you very much and a very good afternoon to everyone. So going straight to the question, we are asking the question about how do we redefine the narrative, of Africa, and, how do we actually leverage on our strength, etc., to rebrand Africa, or to, have the new Africa. Couple of things to start with is the fact that we must understand, and rightly so, that we are responsible for our own relevance. Others will come to your aid, but as we have said, everybody, especially in international politics, and in maybe generally in human life, people have permanent interests and not permanent friends. And for that reason, it is not about us expecting that our narrative should be written or redefined by someone else. Today, that has been the situation. Other people are actually defining our narrative. We are saying today that we want to redefine. What it means is that what has been defined is not in our interest. And so we want to do it again, do it in our way. Who can do it better for you than yourself? And so for me, we need to champion the redefinition of our narrative. And the question we need to ask ourselves is, are we ready for that? Are we showing signs that we are ready to redefine the narrative? So we talk about the mindset, and that is something we cannot stop talking about. The mindset, and I always say that the key to a closed mind is with the owner of that mind. Nobody else has that key except yourself. And therefore, the intentionality, the deliberate step you take to open up your mind so you can create space, unlearn certain things, and learn things that will redefine that narrative is very important for us as Africans. I mean, there are so many stereotypes that we need to start questioning. We have all been socialized in a particular way as Africans, and we should start asking ourselves, are these really defining or redefining our narrative? We've talked about the narrative today, which is about conflict, which is about poverty, unemployment, it's about all the negative things. But let's come back to ask ourselves whether we can do something as a result of what we know today and what we had learned or been socialized yesterday. So let's look at, one of the typical things that I always ask myself. Empty barrels make the most noise. And that is something we have been socialized with, we live with it. And so even the confidence to speak up, to tell our story, to stand up and defend our situation as Africans. We think that the more you do that, perhaps the emptier you become, or you are empty. However, let's look at it well. It says that empty barrels make the most noise. I don't think that when we tell our story, we are making noise. And so why should that affect the way I stand up as an African woman, for that matter, and then speak the African, story, or narrate the African, situation? And so I think that in redefining our narrative, we need to be bold enough to know who we are, what is it that has been narrated for us, and how do we want to shape it in the way that actually defines the future of Africa. We've talked about, human capital, and it abounds. But really, the attitude as we go back to it, are we not trying to, don't we have to ginger ourselves up, raise ourselves in an environment that says that this is the way to do, because we want to rewrite that story. We are talking about, a lot of things. And for instance, again, being very open about what is happening today, for instance. What time did we give ourselves that we want to start this program? Who was here at that time? How have we spent our time? If we believe that time is not just money, but time is life, it means that the time that I do not utilize for something good, I have actually wasted my life. And so when you want to write the narrative, this becomes the positive direction that we want people to see. The young ones are clamoring for inclusion, rightly so. But you can also see the fact that the experience that they are actually imbibing is about what we are showcasing. So even when they have to write that narrative at one point or the other, it is going to be what we have written. And so I think that we have so many strengths. Time will not permit, but I'm sure we'll go into that. We have so many strengths that we can leverage. But for me, it is very key for us to know if we are prepared to redefine our narrative, then we need to look at what the story is today, what you and I want to write. what you and I want others to hear, because nobody can do it better for you. Somebody will blow your trumpet, but I can assure you, you'll blow it better when you are blowing it yourself. And that is how I want to see Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before I move on to Ambassador, there was something I used to say in terms of gaining power in Africa. Before someone becomes a president, look at the number of years they have to suffer. So the moment they become a president, they are in to make sure they gather the money for all the losses they did in the 60 years. How then do we expect, like redefining, like we are discussing, how do you expect this president to redefine rules and regulations to affect me, the youth, when he suffered 60 years of his life with billions of money before we decided to vote him in power? So I think, like, even with the things we are discussing, because you are the older generation, you went into power with hardship. And so when you get there, it's really a difficult point to even look at how to change the narrative from your aspect, like you rightly said. And with the youth coming, we might never get opportunity till we are age 60. So if I'm age 60, how do you expect me to decide to think for the next youth when I really need to harness the money I've spent over the years that my family has spoken about? So that one is really a good point in redefining Africa. Ambassador.
Hello, thank you. Thank you very much, and very good afternoon to you all. Let me start by appreciating the organizers of this program. I thought you guys have done a wonderful job. This is the kind of conversation that we must have from time to time within Africans so that we can improve things. I also would like to say a very big thank you to the earlier panelists. After listening to the keynote speaker, I thought I already had a good time, attending this conference. So thank you guys for a good job that you've done. Let me start by, quoting a line from Robert Nesta Marley that says, "Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds." Africa is in a very difficult position at this point in time. But despite the challenges that we've had as a continent, I think we've also made a lot of progress. I worked in the banking industry for a very long time, but now I also do diplomacy. I'm Nigeria's ambassador to the Republic of Burundi. One of the things you find is that a lot has happened in terms of progress, and I think that while we want to change the narrative, we must also focus on some of the achievements and some of the positive things that has happened within the continent. And we also need to focus on what we think. I think, someone used the word earlier on that says we need to let go of some of the things that we're holding on. And starting from there, I think that's a very good place for me to start. In studying history in Nigeria, I was taught that Mungo Park discovered River Niger, as though there were no people that were living around the Niger before the white man came. So we are actually nothing in Africa until a white man says you exist. That's a big problem, right? That's a big problem, because you are nobody until you are discovered by the white man. So something is fundamentally wrong. I admit that it may be too late in the day, but the earlier we begin to have this conversation, the better for us as a people. Now, let me take it up to, I didn't really appreciate the challenges most African nations face.
How have we spent our time? If we believe that time is not just money, but time is life, it means that the time that I do not utilize for something good, I have actually wasted my life. And so when you want to write the narrative, this becomes the positive direction that we want people to see. The young ones are clamoring for inclusion, rightly so. But you can also see the fact that the experience that they are actually imbibing is about what we are showcasing. So even when they have to write that narrative at one point or the other, it is going to be what we have written. And so I think that we have so many strengths. I mean, time will not permit, but I'm sure we'll go into that. We have so many strengths that we can leverage. But for me, it is very key for us to know that if we are prepared to redefine our narrative,
Then we need to look at what the story is today, what you and I want to write, what you and I want others to hear. Because nobody can do it better for you. Somebody will blow your trumpet, but I can assure you, you'll blow it better when you are blowing it yourself. And that is how I want to see Africa.
Thank you so much. Before I move on to Ambassador, there was something I used to say in terms of gaining power in Africa. Before someone becomes a president, look at the number of years they have to suffer. So the moment they become a president, they are aiming to make sure they gather the money for all the losses they did in the 60 years. How then do we expect, like redefining, like we are discussing, how do you expect this president to redefine rules and regulations to affect me, the youth, when he suffered 60 years of his life with billions of money before we decided to vote him in power? So I think, like, even with the things we are discussing, because you are the older generation, you went into power with passion. And so when you get there, it's really a difficult point to even look at how to change the narrative from your aspect, like you rightly said. And with the youth coming, we might never get opportunity to be at age 60. So if I'm age 60, how do you expect me to decide to think for the next year when I really need to harness the money I've spent over the years that my family has spoken about? So that one is really a good point in redefining Africa. Ambassador.
Thank you. Hello, thank you. Thank you very much, and very good afternoon to you all. Let me start by appreciating the organizers of this program. I thought you guys have done a wonderful job. This is the kind of conversation that we must have from time to time within Africans so that we can improve things. I also like to say a very big thank you to the earlier panelists. After listening to the keynote speaker, I thought I already had a good time, attending this conference. So thank you guys for a good job they've done. Let me start by, quoting a line from Robert Nesta Marley that says, "Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds." Africa is in a very difficult position at this point in time. But despite the challenges that we've had as a continent, I think we've also made a lot of progress. I worked in the banking industry for a very long time, but now I also do diplomacy. I'm Nigeria's ambassador to the Republic of Burundi. One of the things you find is that a lot has happened in terms of progress, and I think that while we want to change the narrative, we must also focus on some of the achievements and some of the positive things that has happened within the continent. And we also need to focus on what we think. I think, someone used the word earlier on that says we need to let go of some of the things that we're holding on. And starting from there, I think that's a very good place for me to start. In studying history in Nigeria, I was taught that Mungo Park discovered River Niger. As though there were no people that were living around the Niger before the white man came. So we are actually nothing in Africa until a white man says you exist. That's a big problem, right? That's a big problem because you are nobody until you are discovered by the white man. So something is fundamentally wrong. I admit that it may be too late in the day, but the earlier we begin to have this conversation, the better for us as a people. Now, let me take it up to, I didn't really appreciate the challenges most African nations face until I joined the business of diplomacy. It's okay to talk about how corrupt African leaders are. It's okay to talk about the fact that $1 billion moved from African continent to Switzerland and to all of this West on a yearly basis. Good conversation to have. But how come we are not discussing the level of exploitation that actually goes on within the continent by these same people that we actually take our monies to? How come, in a corruption case, there must be a giver and there is also a taker? How come in Nigeria, for donkey years, we are still receiving Abacha's loot? Where did the money go to? Someone actually had this funding and they actually be trading with it and doing all kinds of. So who is in discussing corruption? Who is actually corrupt and who is not corrupt? It's actually some of the things that I believe that whenever we come to the table to have this kind of conversation, you begin to, come to the level of understanding of what the hell is going on and what we Africans need to do. I think it's a Nigerian writer that said that unless the lions begin to write, history will always glorify the hunter. It's important that Africans understand, because it comes to that level of consciousness, that here is what I think. As a young banker, I had an opportunity of, my boss called me one day and said, go get a house, let's give you a mortgage to buy the house. So I did. I got my first house. He called me after another 2 months and they said, governments are selling houses in Abuja. Go again. There's a house in so-and-so location. I'll give you a loan to buy it. And I came back to the office and I said, no, I don't think I already have a house. It will take me about 20 years to finish paying the mortgage. He just looked at me and said, okay, you don't see it yet. After another 6 months, he called me again and said, go to another location. They are selling houses. It's not really that expensive. I said, sir, just leave me with this, my one house. Now, here is the thing. I was already educated at that point. I had traveled to quite a couple of places. But because I was focused on just getting a house where I live, I never saw housing as something that can be an investment. Because each one he told me about, and he goes to buy it, what happens 1 year down the line is that the price of that house triples. So he sells it off and replaces his mortgage. So at that point, I wasn't able to see it, irrespective of my education. So within the continent, there are certain things that we still don't understand, except when you are exposed with the kind of information that you need to have. So, and that's where emancipation actually comes in. And that's where our young people must open up their minds to have this kind of conversation. And that's where we need to begin to even understand the kind of, who are we as Africans? Okay, look at, we're talking about narratives. We signed, I think a couple of countries are signatory to AFTA. But how do you trade within the continent when you still have 42 currencies that you're managing within the 54 economies? Isn't that crazy? How do you begin to move goods? Okay, I live in Burundi, okay? Those in Eastern DRC, before they go to Kinshasa, there's no connection, there's no road infrastructure between Eastern DRC and Kinshasa. So they have to come from Congo DRC to Burundi, and take a flight from Burundi 2 hours, 20 minutes to Addis Ababa, and now sleep in Addis Ababa, and then fly again from Addis Ababa to DRC. This is the route. In the same country, they are just moving from East DRC, Eastern DRC, to Kinshasa. So we are talking about trade. Yes, technology will help us. Yes, we've made a lot of progresses, but there are certain things that has to happen. We must have a highway. We must connect our people. We must find a way to sort out our basic infrastructure. No matter what kind of, we can do Facebook, we can do all of the things, but we have to have good schools that our children must be educated in. We have to have hospitals that must treat us of our ailments. We have to have routes that will move from point A to point B. We have to find a way to get our agricultural products from wherever they are coming from to get them to a point where they're going to be finished. So there are things that exist, but I think that it has to start from appreciating where we are, looking at the progresses that we have made, and then trying to identify the things that we need to do that can take us to the next level. And that's why I believe that this kind of conversation is germane for such a time as this. The problem I have is that maybe we needed to have opened it up so that quite a lot of people, and I do hope that maybe this is going on Facebook Live or YouTube Live so that people can actually log on to the conversation and be able to get the kind of understanding that they need.
He actually had money to spare. He realized he was part of the change agents. And these are discussions we are having that, in as much as everybody here on the panel today are people in positions in parliament, it's high time I think the Africans, we start to shift from, oh, we voted for them into power, so why are they not working? Oh, we did this particular thing, but why are they not working? I just want to ask an interesting question. How many of us here have actually been to African countries, and how many have you even been to? Like, if we want to change Africa, you yourself as a person, how many African countries have you gone to? Because we cannot make a change when we don't understand how Burundi is suffering. I cannot sit in Ghana and say I understand Zambia. When I went to Zambia, I didn't know Zambia's weather was nice. It was just like a South African weather that, it's not like Ghana weather where you can realize I'm not in Ghana. But if I hadn't gone there, how would I know Zambia is nice, Zambia has got lands? Like, how will I even understand? And as a young person, I feel one of the problems we are facing is because our leaders, before they became leaders, didn't even visit Africa. And when they go to Africa, it's for programs like this. They stay in the hotel, they get up, 3 days later they are going back to their country. So how do you know that in Congo somewhere, somebody is suffering and work has to be done? And I think this moves on to my next question, which is, considering the multifaceted nature of Africa's development, how can we ensure that our strategies and policies prioritize the needs and aspirations of all African citizens, particularly those in marginalized communities, and promote inclusive and equitable progress? Ambassador, do you understand? Okay.
Thank you very much. You see, if we are not very careful as young Africans, we will tell our children the same stories our parents told us. I think enough of the blaming of the people that colonized us. It happens. I've seen a lot of African leaders do this. It's been quite a long time, and I think that we have grown to the level where we need to take responsibility and move things on from here. I said this to lay the foundation of the fact that I believe that the regional organizations in Africa need to do a lot more in terms of inclusion. I have no reason, in fact, all of the central banks within West Africa have for the past 20 years trying to develop the ECO to become a common currency, and they haven't succeeded up until now. I have no idea why the East African community, Burundi is just about the size of a province in Nigeria, for example. If you drive 30 minutes, you're in Eastern DRD. So I have no idea why countries within regions, why I have to fly 1 hour 30 minutes from Abuja, and then my phone is no longer working the moment I have to come to this place. So I may have to buy another SIM card for us to be able to do some of these things. So policy-wise, there are a few things that needs to happen. But even ourselves, we need to understand that we can move on from what it is that we're doing. And look at Africa, look at the young people, look at the creative industry, for example, within the continent. It doesn't matter the argument you're having with someone in the US. If a Burna Boy comes on stage, if a Wizkid comes on stage, we've made tremendous progress, and this is a sector that, if the government haven't paid attention to, that sector has just developed by itself. And making a lot of money. If I tell it, I'm sure if I make an announcement that the Burna Boy is going to be coming here on one of the biggest stadiums in this, I'm sure the place will be filled to the brim. You get what I mean? So I think that these are progresses that we're making, and we need to complain less and begin to talk more. And that's why when you do more, that's why when you came to my side, I felt that, we just enjoy talking. African leaders, Africans, we like to blame people, we like to play the blame game, but nobody ever comes to the table to say, to begin to do. I used to be in the housing industry where the rhetoric is what's the housing number shortages, in Nigeria we say 16 million, 17 million. Just keep calling numbers, and nobody's actually, deliberate actions to be able to do certain things that matter for us to be able to make progress. So yes, on the level of government, everybody have got a role to play. I think that there has to be a little bit more of integration. We have to come to the understanding that, people sat somewhere, just drew a map of Africa, uniting people that shouldn't be united, dividing the ones that should not be divided, and yes, that's basically how it happens. And meanwhile, they are my models, they are my role models. They have to tell me, the guys that put chain in my forefather's neck are the people that have to now tell me what the model of human rights, how I need to, this is the kind of situation we found ourselves. But it's important that I also, we focus on the politics of it, because I also operate in the political space as well. We must question, what is democracy basically? What is our brand of democracy? Africa must go back and realize and go back and sit back and sort out what democracy means for them. Because what it is for America is probably not what it should be for Africa. Countries that are even developing, take China for example, take Saudi Arabia for example. When was the last time they conducted election? Do you have an idea? These are 4 years election cycle. How can we even develop under that kind of structure? So we are likely going to be running a cycle of elect and regret, relating it to the kind of discussion we had on the parable of the eggs. We just keep, we run the election, every president, everybody comes with a lot of hopes, and then after 2-3 years, all hopes are dashed. They are planning for the next one. And so there are a lot of things we need to question as a people. And what kind of leadership do we actually need in this country? Sometimes a lot of people have argued that maybe a benevolent dictator makes sense, maybe this and that, but that's a conversation we must have to figure out what is it that works for us. In Nigeria, for example, if you consider how much the country puts in elections, just organizing elections, if you think about how much money that is wasted in just organizing, and this happens every 4 years, and there are states in Nigeria that have off-cycle elections, and there are people that will also die or be incapacitated in the course of the work that they're doing that you have to also conduct by-elections for. So at any particular point in time, a year before an election is conducted, nothing happens in the country. Everybody's discussing politics and elections. So how do we grow? Even in the US, for example, electoral colleges is finding something that is actually unique to the people. Yes, you can have majority of the votes, but you don't actually have to become American president if you don't win by electoral college. That's actually an introduction that fits into the American system. In Africa, for example, where people are hungry, do they understand what one man, one vote means? The man is looking for what to eat. At my level of education, I didn't understand investment in housing. So how can someone that hasn't eaten understand that you have to vote for somebody is one man, one vote? No. The person that will give him money will give him money. He will just go and do what the person has told him to do. So does democracy really work for us as a continent? So we have to come to the level where we question and have that conversation so that all of us we come to the understanding that we need to change certain things about it. While also appreciating the progress that we've made so far, because we haven't actually been, a lot of, when I was flying to this place, I saw lots of Chinese. If you fly a lot of, if you go to a lot of African countries, you're going to see influx of Chinese, but what exactly are they doing there? While, in the streets of Ghana, maybe someone is praying, his prayer point is to go to China. Meanwhile, if you go to China, somebody's prayer point in China is also to come to Accra. You get what I mean? So they also find our place much more, they find the resources, they find opportunities here while we are going there. So I think that a lot of work needs to be done as Africans, and I believe that this kind of conversation creates a platform for us to expand on all of this.
Thank you so much. Do you believe in a school of thought where we have an independent political system where after every 4 years of every party, there is someone who checks on every infrastructure that was started that has not been finished? Because I look even in Ghana, NPP comes, 4 years in power, they were building a certain school and then they were overthrown. NDC comes, no, I don't want to rebuild that, I want to rebuild another one. Have a tax money, because it's a system where you need to prove that during your tenure of office or 4 years of your party, this is the particular thing you did. Don't we think it's really affecting us as citizens? Where we are wasting money because we feel this is my political party. The hospital was not finished. Another person came, built another hospital, and the infrastructure is still there till today. As an ambassador, what kind of ideology would you bring to solve such a problem that is affecting Africa today? Because there's a lot of infrastructures that have not been finished, and I don't think they're going to be finished anytime.
Okay, thank you. I think if you followed my discussion, I said we needed to question a lot of things about political, even selecting people in office and the nature of politics that we practice in Africa. You're even talking about one party. What about when it happens that another party wins the election? So everything with the first government, they will spend the next 2 years accusing the previous government for not doing the right thing. And they will end up doing worse than the previous government have done. So we see that every now and then. I think that the electoral cycle in Africa is too short. That's my personal opinion. Anybody can controvert it, but I feel that the timing is too short. Even if, how long does it even take to do infrastructure? The tube system in the UK, how long did it take them to do that? What you find is that once you transit government from one level, from one person to another, there's a distrust in the system. They think that the previous person has got a lot of deals. So we will continue to have, and I believe that the people that colonized us and ensure that we're practicing this methodology of democracy understand this. They understand it, because what exactly do they do? There is a lot of influence, external influence in African politics. If you don't know that, just know that today. As a matter of fact, there is no coup d'etat that happens in the African continent that does not have an external support.
That is so true.
I think Africans have to know that. This. It doesn't matter whatever your issues are. There will always be, one on the eve of the election of Nigeria in 2015, Obama made a speech to the people of Nigeria. What else can you call interference? And what business do you have to be talking to Nigerians but they have that understanding. Don't get me wrong that. We cannot continue with this nature of development that we're having. However, even in trying to do with that, with this, there's something I found in Kenya that I felt was a bit interesting. Kenya had a ministry called Kenya 2030. And they have had this ministry for about 10 years now. What they've done is that the ministry's responsibility was to plan for infrastructural development as to how they wanted Kenya to look like in 2030. So it doesn't matter the government that comes in, there's already a plan that you have to be working with. So once a new government takes over, you go and see where the previous one stops, and then it allows the parliament to review what the hell is going on with that plan from time to time. So I think that that's actually one of the ways we can use to address this kind of inconsistencies. Because if there's already a plan and everybody agrees that this is how we want our country or want Africa to look like in a certain, just the same way we have African, the EU agenda for 2063. Yes, we spoke a lot of English, but going down into details, we need a highway to move from point A to point B, and that highway has to be done between this time and between this time. So if we have challenges with completing them, then we'll look at it, but there has to be, government has to continue with that plan. And not every government that you're elected to come in with their own plan will never get anything done.
Thank you so much, Dr. Frank.
Let me take it from this point of leadership. And I think that a lot has been said and continue to be said about political leadership, and whether we think that the path is right or wrong for us as Africans, as citizens. I would want to dwell on other aspects of leadership. Political leadership, yes. Business leadership, what is going on there? Student leadership, what is going on there? Family leadership, what is going on there? I think that at a certain point in time, we equate leadership to political leadership. And that in itself needs to be redefined, in my view. Because from the nucleus, it germinates, or from the top, a kind of whichever way. I think at every point in time, somebody is a leader of a sort. Whether I'm a leader as far as my siblings are concerned, or I'm a leader in business, or I'm a leader in politics, or I'm a leader in church, as Africans, I'm a leader where? What kind of example, what kind of policies am I actually, bringing across, so that that in itself culminates or cascades, if it's on the top, to the rest of the citizenry, so that as Africans, we can talk about leadership and not be focused on just one aspect of leadership, in my view. And in all these aspects of leadership, as we want to integrate as Africans, I think that the issue of governance framework is very important. At every aspect, there must be that kind of rules and regulations, governance around the way I run my home, governance around the way I should run business, governance around the way I should run, any kind of organization that is in my hand, governance around the way I run political, space. And that governance means that there should be regulations. So in Africa, there should be common, as far as we can, legal framework, regulations, and more importantly, compliance and consequences for compliance or non-compliance. I think when everybody is, kept on his or her toes, as far as leadership in any sphere is concerned, then we'll be talking about everybody moving in a certain direction that is useful. We talk about technology. Technology is great, and technology really eases the whole space for us, gives us the opportunity to come out with framework and policies that can support. But I always believe that Technology drives the world or rules the world, but it is people who make it happen. And therefore, when the people do not have the right frame of mind, if people are not, the infrastructure is not there, when governance is not right, when there's no transparency, there's no integrity, when at a small, that small leadership role that is giving me, I'm not able to handle it, then it means that when I'm given a bigger one, that is going to happen. So I think that we need to see ourselves as Africans who will not continue to look at leadership as just political leadership. But in every sphere of leadership, we need to play that role. And we need to start, as Africans to integrate, moving from, being competitive to being complementary, to complement each other as against competing with each other. In our kind of communication, how do we need to communicate effectively as against communicating to confuse. We need as Africans to live in community because our communal living is one thing that defines us as against trying to copy to be individualistic, which is now the narrative. And so I think that when we talk about integration, we are talking about trade and access to trade. We are talking about making sure that the right policies are in place, and these policies are known, communicated, people are educated about, the awareness is created. Because there are times that we have the policies, but they are hidden somewhere that you and I will not even know that this is available for me to access. And when that happens, it means that the policy is there, but the factors of the process by which it will add value to you and I will not be available. And those are the things that we need to, so that when there's integration, we are talking about complementing what Ghana has, maybe Nigeria may not have. What Nigeria has, maybe Kenya doesn't have. How do we bring about complementing each other? As against today, I find Nigeria and Ghana, in a particular situation, and we start competing. What about that? Why can't we see ourselves as, I'll help my brother, he must help me. So perhaps if there's anyone to compete with, it is the other, and not ourselves. But that is what is happening today. So when we understand leadership from that concept, then everybody sees himself or herself as a leader in that small corner, in that small space, and we all act as great leaders, and that culminates into the kind of Africa that we want to see with that great leadership at every point in time. Thank you so much.
I would have wished all these conversations are being carried out in African language, other than the English language. That would have been a starting point for redefining our identity and then starting a new path of development for Africa. But maybe one day we will be there. So the question is, when do we start and who starts? It behoves on both of us, all of us here, to start thinking through Africa. The matter for integration cannot be emphasized. The European Union is a classic example of how integration has come to Europe. The first speaker reminded us that Europe was rebuilt after the 1945, the Second World War, and that brought into life the Bretton Woods institutions. It was, World Bank was called Bank for Reconstruction, just for US, and just for Europe to rebuild. So it can be done if cultural reforms are put in place to develop Africa. Your question, your main question was how to leverage on these things to help marginalized people. Yes, so marginalized people all across societies. We're talking about women, we're talking about children, and the most vulnerable in society. So the factors of production, land, well, whatever, all the factors of production, the distribution of the unfairness, the inequitable distribution of all these things affect the marginalized people. All across Africa, women do not have access to care, they do not have access to land. They have got to do all that in order to survive. somebody told me that men are living, but women are surviving. And I don't know how true it is. But nowadays, both of us in Africa, we seem to be surviving better than living. So it's a critical point in our lives. How do we harness our natural resources? Properly so-called resource governance systems put in place to ensure equitable distribution and allocation of resources in order to avoid the tragedy of the commons, in order to avoid the conflict situations where natural resources present. My ambassador here in that enclave of Burundi and all that, he talked about Dr. Kogo, and he said leaders are not traveling to go and see what is happening elsewhere. Go to Dr. Kogo. The main problem is not about anything the people, but it's about access to the natural resources, the control of resources. And the other man there at the global north wants your resources. So all that they do to help you is to help both of you to fight. You provide you with the ammunition and fighting, and you will be looting the diamonds and the gold and all these things. Niger Delta in Nigeria, the Sarawiwa case, it was about petroleum, natural resources. So we must rethink about the natural endowed resources given to us by our Creator in order to help us develop, rather it has become a source of worry to us, a point of conflict to us. All these things will see governance systems, leadership, and our lady has laid out the levels of leadership, captains of leadership, religious leaders, wherever we find ourselves, we are going to provide all these things in order to foster unity among ourselves and integration, proper integration. So international politics and geopolitics tells us that once you put your strength together, you are a force to reckon with, and you become more influential in international circles than talking about. Africa is still the largest continent. Somebody should tell me. I don't know if we are still the largest continent. Otherwise, we are a sleeping giant for quite a long time. It's about time we get up our lives and get up and rise up from our slumber. Former President Nnamdi Azikiwe, yes, my colleagues, my brothers from Nigeria, sisters will be correct. He once said, he who knows and he who do not know, but do not know that he do not know, is a fool, shining. And he who knows, but do not know that he knows, is asleep, awakening him. And he who knows and knows that he knows, is a wise man, follow him. So these are the things we need to remind ourselves of. And as young entrepreneurs, young people coming around from Africa, showing that kind of passion, it gives me hope. I'm so inspired today, listening to all these things and the quest to get out of the woods and get Africa on the map of prosperity, something that we need to carry these conversations on. You rightly talked about political systems here in Ghana and elsewhere in Africa, I must say, where parties come into government, governments come, abandon projects or completed and all of things. If you had to adhere to rules and regulations, you really have been gotten there. The 1992 Constitution of Ghana, the directive principle of state policy, chapter 4 of the Constitution, is so clear and points it out. Governments coming on, continuing to complete projects that have been initiated on this year. So the paradigm shift must be a stronger civil society organization system, where we have state and non-state actors being on state actors to account for leadership. We must account for the power, the authority that has been vested onto us by the people, by the citizens. By so doing, we'll be able to get on with some of these things. And the youth of today, we've been told that there's no shortcut to prosperity. hard work, and hard work, hard thinking. Sometimes I'm afraid to say that we refuse to think. In Africa, most of us refuse to think, hoping that somebody else will think for us. And when that happens, you've sold your birthright. So together, let us all start thinking and thinking deep, and the way to go and chart our own path of development. Thank you.
I think our discussion today is on the new Africa. Do you think? I've heard two schools of thoughts who are saying we need the United Countries of Africa to be able to make decisions. I keep asking them, what is the role of the African Union? Because I thought that was their role. Who watches the watchman? My president is watching you, but who watches him? Who do presidents account to after every tenure of office for everything you've done within the system? Because we must all be truthful today that I want to make a change, but there's a system that makes sure I can't make a change. Even the Bible says it that there's a horn that has set itself above me, and I need to cut it for them to lift their hands. So there's a horn even for us that use that. I cannot just get up today and say, okay, I want to set up an individual committee where we are now going to change the government. Who authorized you? I need to be appointed to be able to make that change. So my question in terms of the new Africa, what is your individual thoughts on how Africa can progress with the number of countries within Africa, with individual presidents making every discussion? Because when you look at, say, Mali, when you want to send things outside, sometimes that's what be done. What is the system between us as countries that I can transfer my mangoes from here to Zambia without so much of tariffs and all that? How are our export systems? So when we talk about the new Africa, what is your, I'll say, your one sentence on the approach to the new Africa? I'll start with Ambassador.
Okay, I think this is, hello. This is like a closing remarks, right? Okay, number one is that I think, and I'm suggesting that this gathering must rise with a communique that is recommending to African leaders that they have to translate their constitution into several local languages that they have. So people that are of citizens of those countries can actually appreciate the laws that are governing them. I say this, very seriously because quite a lot of people that we govern with a particular document called Constitution have not read that document. They don't know it, they don't even relate to it. It's actually when people want to come to, maybe you're a lawyer or you want to become a politician, that you begin to now study that document. So one of the things we can do is recommend to them to say, listen, this is your Constitution, can you translate it so that way people will that speak several languages can relate to it and begin to understand and even make contribution as to how that can also be, how you can deal with that. Let me also say that from where we have found ourselves, we must make progress from there, but you must start with what you have around you. I think that a lot of us that are young people should also have some kind of interest in the political system that we have. It is, you cannot change anything that is happening here from the outside. So as much as you can say you don't like politics or you don't want to relate with it, just understand that having interest, before you can even make suggestions as to how you think things can change, you need to first of all get yourself in the room where the discussion is going on. I think that this is extremely very important because in Africa, running elections are very expensive. But one of the things leaders do, political office leaders do, is what I call exercise of discretion. That's what you do at the particular point of time. You just basically exercise the discretion. And I know that when people that are intelligent, young people, get into political positions, and it doesn't have to be contesting elections because you may not have the resources. But if you participate in the process, what you will find is that you can be appointed. You can become a special advisor. There are lots of people that wield powers around politicians that are actually not politicians themselves. The people the president wakes up with, the people he sleeps with, are bound to have much more influence on him, because they will say, do this, and they find themselves, the person in government will find themselves doing those things. So I think that this is one of the things we can do to be able to penetrate the system. The more you run away from it, nothing is going to change. But pick interest, I'm not saying run, because running may cost you a lot of money. But if you have interest, you should be able to contribute. Maybe one of the days, or you may also be lucky to get appointed, and then whatever skills you have can also be brought to bear. Because one of the things I know about skills is that once it's identified, it's promoted from anyone. So I think these are the things that you can do.
Even in the UK, they've got what they call the Citizens Advice Groups. It's a building where you've got volunteers who go there, and as a citizen, I can just go in and say, my children's school fees I can't pay. I know you know there is a policy that you can pay my school fees for. So they've got that setup that allows citizens the right to be able to find out policies that they don't even know about. Which I think is high time in our country to tend to have those influence. Our lawyers just are not going to court, but they are also sitting at these places to inform citizens, because we can actually do these documentations in normal languages, but who's going to read? If not, we need to start adding our constitution to the churches. What if I go to church and my pastor is preaching the Bible? You need to tell me what the constitution actually also tells me. Because in that way, I'm learning not just about God, but I'm also learning about His end I'm living in and what is actually for. So that is the essential. Please, Dr. Stella.
I would want to say that as Africans, we need to believe that we are stronger together. I also want to say that in terms of policies, etc., as we have mentioned, whether we come together as one United States of Africa or what, with same policies, etc., diversity will continue to be with us because that is life. But we must find unity in diversity. We must love diversity because it brings different opinions and different ideas, which when harnessed actually give you the desired results. But we must live inclusion, and that is where the marginalization, etc., comes up. Love diversity, live inclusion. Because as has been said by somebody, that diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being invited or asked to dance with the rest of them. And so it does not matter what policies we create as one Africa or new Africa, if we do not ensure that those who need to actually educate everyone on the policies, or those who need to take advantage of the policies, are actually doing so for the benefit of Africa and all of them, then we may have all the policies, but we may not necessarily translate these policies or this vision into reality. And that is key for us. As African youth, we need, or you need to understand that there is empowerment that from the experienced ones, perhaps you need to hold people as you rise, you lift them. But people should be intentional about this kind of relationship. And that is what I like what the keynote address PK said, that we need to know what gap as a young African, or as a young person, what is the gap that you have identified? And who in that other sector has what it takes, the strength to actually support you to fix that gap you have. And when we are able to do that, it means that we are moving forward. And everybody trying to understand the African concept and trying to rewrite that narrative, making sure that we believe in what we say, that we are stronger together. Then indeed, we are going to hold each other's hand. And we are going to say that it doesn't matter how many times you fall, somebody is there to help lift you up. But when as Africans, we do not love diversity, when as Ghanaians or Nigerians or whoever, even within our own state, we cannot accept diversity, then we are not able to move on. We are talking about tourism in Africa, and it is one area that when we actually handle it, we'll be able to love ourselves and understand ourselves, because you then learn about the different cultures, which will forever be the cultures of these people. But one thing, apart from the flights, inconveniences, etc., let's even look at our hotel rates in Africa. So expensive that sometimes you ask yourself, is it, and so we need to look at every facet of our economy, every facet of our leadership, category, every facet of our thinking and our very beings. And I believe that when we do that with a common purpose, we'll be able to translate all those visions that we have, whether on paper, in policy, etc., into reality, and we can make that journey. And all of us, young and old, because the young will become old tomorrow, and there will be another young. And so as we go along from generation to generation, we will be making an impact and leaving a legacy that will be worth emulating by whoever succeeds us. Thank you.
I know you are hard pressed for time, but there is something I would like us to share, maybe of interest to colleague interpreters. You're talking about marginalization. There's also good apology. And then, for all that you said, self-reflecting and all other things that's hampering Africa's development and marching forward, it's also the force majeure, the natural phenomenon of global warming and climate change. It does a great toll on us for our sustainable development drive. And for that reason, if I identify opportunities within the climate change systems, though negative, but then we are calling for climate resilient investments across Africa so that we will be able to create jobs, employment, and then also make our economies resilient against shocks and all that. So we have what we call CBA, Climate Global Forum, comprising of 58 nations. Now, two-thirds of that are African countries. They cut across the Caribbean and all that. Currently, the presidency is here. Our president is representing and myself is especially what we have to develop so what is climate prosperity plans where economic development, investment portfolios and all that, very much environment resilient investments are being put in place. I will enjoy all of the data to go on the website, Google, and see where the activities are, so you can then feel it. Let me also say that trillions of dollars are setting out to finance climate activities.
Is it the thing for the new Africa as we look to the next generation or the new Africa? Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's a very difficult question because democracy is an import. But we had our own indigenous democracy systems. We were practicing our own governance systems before the so-called democracy was brought to us. So for me, it is about how we go about it, the implementation and all that. Water is life. Everybody knows it, isn't it? But we have people who die in water. People who get drowned in water and they get that, they die. So water is life. It is how you utilize, how you use the water that will make it positive or negative. Democracy, we have been told, is all about tolerance